A Bit Lit, celebrating research and creativity of all kinds.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mira. How are you doing?
I'm very, very good and so happy to see you and chat with you over Zoom.
Thank you for asking me. I'm honored to be here to talk about the work that you've been doing and about our relationship and collaboration over the years.
Yes. When Andy asked me to be on A Bit Lit, I couldn't think of anyone more compassionate and someone who really, really accompanied me through this journey. Is such a cliche, but it is. As you, since I came to the US as a grad student in 2008. So I'm very, very happy for your generous time and labor and willingness to have a conversation with me.
I'm delighted. So do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about how you came to be a Renaissance specialist in the academic world?
Oh, that's a that's a great, I have a great story about how I came to become an early modernist. But I am Mira Assaf Kafantaris. I am an incoming assistant professor of English at Butler University in Indianapolis. For the last 13 years, I've been at Ohio State, first as a doctoral student, and then after as contingent faculty. And this is when and where I met Jen, who is my mentor, my friend, and someone that inspires me very much, and I learned so much from. How I came to become an early modernist. It's a very, very embarrassing story. But you know, what's another embarrassing story? I did my BA at the Lebanese University, which is the state university of Lebanon, and because of the war, the university stopped hiring people. And the professors who taught me for 4 years all did their PhDs in the US when new formalism was en vogue. So we never referred to the Renaissance as the early modern period. That was not part of the register at all. So when I went to the American University of Beirut to do my master's, I had graduated being from the Lebanese University by writing a thesis on James Joyce, and I thought that I'm going to become a Joycean. And the first course on offer was early modern religion. And I thought, oh, this is pre-modernity. This is going to be the course that helps me really delve into James Joyce's really tense relationship with the Catholic Church. And I signed up for the class. And then the first few months were very hard because I was not used to the text at all. I remember we were reading Knox and
John Knox is quite an introduction to the period. Like, of all texts to start with, to kind of have early on, that's a tough one.
Yeah, that's what I remember, and the rest is history. I stayed with the period. Thank you for asking me this question. What about you, Jen? Would you introduce yourself to the listeners and audience of A Bit Lit?
Yeah, so I'm Jennifer Higginbotham. I'm an associate professor of English at Ohio State University. And I actually arrived at the university just shortly before Mira, came as a graduate student. She was a student in my very first graduate class that I taught. So I have, watched her progress from there to her current moment. And she's also kind of watched me become more comfortable in my role as a faculty member. So we have a long history with that. My research has focused quite a lot on feminist approaches to Renaissance and early modern literature. I'm particularly working on women's poetry right now.
Well, fabulous, fabulous. I also want to tell people that Jen is collaborating on, she has written a great essay for a special issue on Racing Queens that the open access journal Scholar and Feminist Online is going to publish in the fall. It was a great moment for me to be editing my professor, my mentor. I felt very much it was such an honor and a privilege to read your work from the perspective of an editor, and it just fascinated me how you were able to bring in the popular music of Janelle Monáe alongside the masks of Ben Jonson. Would you like to talk to me a little bit and to all of us in the ether about that piece?
Well, that piece is for the issue that you are co-editing on Racing Queens, which in and of itself was looking to cross time periods and generic boundaries. So it gave me an opportunity to think through some of the issues that had been percolating around. And one of the things that I found is that the students I work with always teach me so much and help me see things that I hadn't seen before. So I started sort of thinking through the idea of Racing Queens and where that might get me. And I'm a huge Janelle Monáe fan, and I've been teaching Janelle Monáe in my transhistorical literary classes, often when I want to teach people about metrical variation and aesthetics and style. And so I have a really real fondness for her poetic genius. I don't do very well with Jonson most of the time. I find Ben Jonson very difficult. I've never quite known what to do with his mass. And so actually what was fun about that piece for me was that it was like Janelle Monáe gave me a way to understand Jonson. I can do Janelle Monáe without Jonson. I don't need him for her, but she really did help me have a better sense of the mask as this funny genre that is both visual, but also literary, and it's highly specific, and it's storytelling, but it's not particularly coherently narrative. And so it was really fun to do. I was sort of bringing together some of the things I've been doing in the classroom, and it gave me an opportunity to actually, talk about that in a research setting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the journal as a whole. And I also think that the juxtaposition of royalty and race and gender is particularly salient right now. Could you say a little bit about how the special issue came about and how that collaboration got started, especially for other early career scholars who might be thinking about, how can I pursue these kinds of professional opportunities?
Yes, I would love that. I have been writing I've been writing public humanities pieces that read the Meghan Markle phenomenon through the lens of the early modern period, but specifically the way Markle is raised and the anti-Blackness that so viciously surfaces in the conversation around her. And I thought I saw very much a lot of traces in this these tropes, these anti-Black this misogynoir tropes in the plays of the period that we study, the early modern period. So I started writing public humanities pieces that bring these two as well, these two themes together of early modern queenship and Meghan Markle's blackness as a woman in supposedly in power, but in the public sphere, so to speak. So as a result of these pieces, Kim Hall, who has also become a mentor, Kim Hall, who wrote the field shifting Things of Darkness, reached out and suggested this journal because it comes out of Barnard, and this is where Kim Hall is a named chair there, the Lucille Clifton chair, and then she introduced me to the editors. I submitted a proposal, and then I reached out to Sonia Drimmer, who is an art historian and has written beautifully, again, about the presentation of women through her lens of art historian who works on the medieval period. And also I reached out to Treva Lindsay, who is a Black feminist historian at Ohio State and is very, very knowledgeable about Black womanhood and girlhood. And because the special issue is one that bridges different historical periods and genres. We thought, we have worked so well together as three co-editors.
That kind of real collaboration is so exciting to see. I think that the ability to kind of bring all that together is something that people have been trying to work towards for a very long time, and to see it all come together is very exciting. It
was really such a generative opportunity to be able to think across the disciplines and historical moments and see if where concepts and ideologies overlap and then diverge and create other forms of differentiation, power structures. These are all themes that motivate me so much.
Yeah, I actually just finished teaching a hybrid grad class on premodern race, and it was intended to be multidisciplinary. It was, of course, premodern, so I was doing medieval, Renaissance, and a little bit up towards the late 17th, 18th century. Huge range. You cannot be an expert on all of that, but it was so intellectually exciting to go back and really find out things that I simply didn't know. For example, just sort of understanding really how Mediterranean slavery worked, really being able to kind of dig into that and to have a sense that, one of the things that was a factor in the development of the transatlantic slave trade was when the Ottoman Empire cut off access to another source of slaves from the Mediterranean. And so suddenly having that global picture was huge for me in terms of really allowing me to have a sense of both what the early modern English context and British context had in common with other aspects of the sort of global move towards chattel slavery, but also like what's different about it. What is particularly English? When is it English and how much is it European? Mm-hmm. Those things were really fascinating.
Absolutely. That's I would have loved to be on this a fly
Well,
on
I
the
taught
wall.
one of your essays, actually, it was one of the pieces where you wrote about, why race before race now. And that was one of the pieces that I had all of us look at, getting a sense of, not just the content of the course, but also the stakes. And I think that's one of the things that I really find fruitful about your scholarship, is that I think that you are very good, not just at arguing what's there, but why it's important for us to notice it. And since I said, with Johnson, for example, that Janelle Monáe gave me an inroad, one of the things about this class was that I taught the Fairy Queen, which I have never taught and have avoided. But I was inspired by the work that you have done on Duessa, who wears a Persian mitre.
Yeah.
And so seeing the Fairy Queen through your eyes gave me an inroad to it that I didn't have before. And I actually enjoyed teaching the Fairy Queen, which I never thought I would. I suddenly have, an interest in Spencer that wasn't there before, because you had opened up some avenues of exploration that I hadn't seen.
Well, thank you very much. I've also grappled a lot with Spencer. He's like for me was this opaque world that I did not have access to, even though I've taken Spencer classes, but I always felt that there is this big wedge between my positionality and this world that Spencer weaves. And when I looked at the way that not only Duessa is raised, but also Una is very much created, how you can see white womanhood created, but particularly through Una's white sentimentality, which became so much down the road a part of white supremacist playbook in the 18th and 19th century. And my belief and the belief of critics who work in pre-modern critical race theory, and this is Margot Hendricks's nomenclature, is that our life and the tragedy of chattel slavery, the tragedy of racial capitalism, not only are they ongoing, but the germs of these ideologies very much appear in our period. They do not appear in the form that we know or later became chattel slavery, but it's not. It's not. The ideas travel and they mutate.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, this is because I've been thinking about the work that you've been doing on dynastic alliances and the way that those were often mediated through the queens and their foreignness. Mm-hmm. And having just taught the course on pre-modern race, one of the things that I was struck by was in the Spanish context, blood purity was so central to the caste system and the idea of, who was Spanish and who wasn't, and whether or not as a converso you were Christian or not Christian. And I was wondering, in terms of the idea of the royal bloodline, where the queens are kind of bringing in not only their alliance, but also their blood, what role did that play across Europe? The idea of pure blood versus contaminated blood. I was recently looking at this in Elizabeth Carey's The Tragedy of Miriam, where it worked in some ways the opposite of how I had expected it to, which was that rather than in that case where Herod had married Miriam, mm-hmm. her blood was purifying his base blood, and so that her children were seen as, you know, now purified of it and whitened in a kind of Jewish sense. How much did that kind of sense of not wanting to have a Catholic queen because that would contaminate the blood, how much was that spread across Europe?
Well, what a great question, Jen. In the Iberian context, there's definitely the limpieza de sang, the purity of blood. But what Iberianists tell us that the intensity of these laws or decrees were not unanimous all the time. That there's, you know, in some places they were enforced, or in other time, sometimes where they were really enforced, and some other times where they were actually, you know, tolerated. So it was not a kind of clear-cut moment of in groups and out groups. There was a lot of intermixing happening, and the work of Nick Jones, for example, shows that how much Blackness in particular was part of the fabric of Iberian society. It's and every facet of it. Black people, whether enslaved or not, or free, occupied central positions in Spain, according to Nick Jones's work. Also in England, as in London, as the work of Imtiaz Habib shows. So to go back to the idea of queens. So queens coming from Iberia, like the Spanish, the Infanta, was very much racialized. Catholicism was very much racialized as this contaminating factor, but also her proximity to Blackness as somebody from the Iberian Peninsula, from that period, made her blood very much not only Catholic, but made her, blackened her. In Yasmin Hashimi, the work of Yasmin Hashimi shows how Anne Boleyn was referred to very much as swarthy, as Black, because of her foreignness. So it was not only that her nationality as French, but it's also her proximity to Blackness. Her foreignness becomes blackened. So how was this approach in our period and in the English text, which is mostly what I work on. In English text, you can see either ultimate rejection of foreignness, like in Spenser's Fairy Queen, because as Dennis Britton tells us, there's no conversion in the Fairy Queen. And this conversion comes very much from the idea of the elect, that religion passes on through heredity. And this is why we need to just excise foreignness altogether, because religious conversion is not going to bring about this pure commonwealth that the extreme Puritans believed in and still believe in. Like still, you know, white evangelism in the US is still alive and well and very much part of American politics. Trump, for example, our former president, was referred to as a Cyrus, King Cyrus, the biblical Cyrus, who was degenerate, but also was part of this eschatological idea of the second coming. In other plays, for example, in Shakespeare's Henry VIII, queenship is not, the racial contamination is not an issue in Henry VIII, because the idea of the king, of the powerful king that Shakespeare's Henry V also brings about, the body, the perfect body of the king, is what ensures purity and this linear futurity. The foreign queen can easily be absorbed into Englishness. And there's this idea, the image of the grafting that was very, very much in circulation in the Jacobean period. And Barnaby Barnes, in one of his dedication to James I, says, I don't worry that your children you're going to marry off your children to non-English, because like grafting, your children are going to absorb any kind of blemish of foreignness in place. So you can see different manifestation of how race was created and enforced in the works that we're doing.
That's so fascinating, because it's like instead of being a kind of stable ideology, it's a sort of thing that can be mobilized selectively in order to create particular power relations. So if the foreignness of the queen is something you want to use to stigmatize someone, then it's important. Otherwise, you can, if you don't want to use it, it doesn't serve your political ends. Then you can say, well, the king's body is the body that really matters.
Yeah.
I mean, your work on Meghan Markle actually also, I think, comes in here, because I was thinking about how Meghan's Blackness marks her as foreign and problematic for people, and a lot of the really vicious attacks on her, while the fact that Kate Middleton was a commoner somehow becomes sidelined. She becomes this kind of almost royal, inborn queen, future queen, in a way that is a remarkable contrast, considering that, initially there was a sense of, well, he's marrying a commoner, and now her commonness has been eclipsed by her whiteness.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The work of Patricia Akemi on rank, how she theorized rank as also a racializing factor. If you think of Malvolio, for example, in Twelfth Night, even though the gender transgression and sexuality transgression is very much the main big transgression of the play, the cross-dressing and everything else. At the end of the day, the people who performed that transgression, Sebastian and Viola, get rewarded with marriage. But the person who gets severely punished is Malvolio, because in that moment of him thinking about learning or acquiring nobility, when he's thinking about, the velvet that he's going to wear, and like this, he's fantasizing. The play gives us this moment of him transgressing rank to become Olivia's partner. And this is when the play comes down and punishes him very much severely, because he thought about, or he imagined, this kind of intermarriage, which is very much racialized. He cannot learn whiteness. He cannot learn nobility, even though conduct books were very, very much de rigueur. Markham and all these other writers in our period that were showing you or giving you the tools to become or to feign nobility. But this only goes that far. If somebody who is not seen as white attempts this crossover, they get punished very, very severely.
Right. And it strikes me that in a play like The Island Princess, which you've written about, there, in order to make someone convertible, they have to be whitened. And that becomes one of the sort of central markers of convertibility is if you are white, well, you were always already, properly Christian and therefore convertible. And I think that that's a quite striking one.
Yeah, this goes back to our history together, Jen. I remember when I was a grad student and I was talking to you about The Island Princess in your office, and we were looking at the title page of Leonardo de Argonsola's Conquistas de las Islas Malucas, which is the source of The Island Princess. And in that title page, the foreign queen, who is in regalia and half naked, and she is straddling a crocodile, she accepts the biblical Spanish revelation, the conquest. She's like very open to it. And I remember you telling me about how her body, her embodiment is very much central to this fantasy of conquest. And that was like a very, very, that was a moment where I felt like my whole body was responding to this door that you opened for me that I have not seen before. What is very fascinating is that in that source play, in Argonsola, so there it's made of like little fictions, little vignettes from indigenous knowledge. So there's a moment of not only colonial violence and conquest, but also colonial extraction, because these folklore stories get anthologized in this book of conquest. But the fascinating thing is that in the source book, the Spanish princess actually picks up one of the native princes, and together they conquer the European conquistador. And if we think, my reading of the play is that if we think of indigenous philosophy or creolization that happens in the Malay Peninsula, it's all about this unity between islands that the play does not give us. It only extracts the knowledge and then makes it look like it was a moment of conversion, of willful conversion, and people get the happy ending is of this life under Portuguese colonization. And I'm very much in my work on the play now, I'm looking at the indigenous creolization moment that the European text took away from us, from the indigenous reading, I would say.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that I think a lot of people, when they come to read some of these plays set elsewhere that are clearly, to some extent, thinking about England or in London in particular, how do you see it as, or how would you help people make sense of the fact that it's the Portuguese? But of course, what's happened is that it's being staged in London for an audience for whom the non-historical outcome of, conquest and extraction would be what they want to hear. So the story it wants to tell this London audience is about that, but it's also about the Portuguese. So what are your thoughts about the sort of the interplay between sort of whiteness and white Christian European identity with the sort of movements in between different types of European identity, like the Portuguese or the French, etc. On the stage?
Oh, that's such a great question.
I know it's a big question.
So I feel like because the Portuguese they very much encourage intermarriage. They called them the casacos, from casal, from couple. So there's a sense of, of course you're going to go and intermarry with the indigenous population. And I want to tell you, who's the French philosopher that the Book of Commonwealth starts with a B. I'll come back. Baudin, yes.
Jean Baudin?
Yeah, Jean Baudin, he, part of his philosophy or thinking about conquest is that you cannot conquer only militarily through force. You need to use reproduction, you need to intermarry and populate these conquered places through reproductive force. So it's not, one does not work alone. It has to go together. And this is, I think is different from how the English approach conquest because of Protestantism, is that intermarriage was not thought of as this settler colonial tool. You try to convert, but there's not this crossover that we see in between the Spanish and for example the natives of I'm thinking of the mestiçage myth, that the origin of Mexico is this moment of intermarriage, which is rape, between Cortés and the indigenous woman, and that the myth is that this moment of mestiçage created the Mexican population that is a hybrid between Spanish power and indigenous knowledge, which it's a myth that has been very much critiqued and debunked because of its racist underpinnings. But I do feel that I do think that because they're Portuguese in England in the early modern stage, this fantasy was able to play out because it's what the Iberians are doing. It's not us, so to speak.
Right. So it's almost like they're getting both in Island Princess. You get the sort of fantasy of exploitation and extraction, but also intermarriage without the anxiety about intermarriage and having to sort of worry about bloodlines.
Yes, absolutely. That's very true.
Can you say a little bit about, because a lot of your work focuses on drama, and we were just checking about Island Princess. Do you think the stage, how much do you think that the stage in and of itself and drama as a genre affects the representation of the gender and race of queens? You've worked on the Fairy Queen as well. I'm just wondering about the staging and how much that context changes the representation.
Yeah. I need to write down all these questions because these
are
are
big ones.
so wonderful.
These are the ones that I struggle with.
It's when you think of the staging of Cleopatra, for example, it's always that round bed, very lush, very sexualized, the materiality that the stage enables, and the sound of difference. For example, to go back to Catherine of Aragon, whenever she staged, she's always staged with this very, very heavy accent. So you can hear otherness, so you can hear race, and you can see it being materialized through props, through the embodiment, through also the blackening of characters. The work of, of course, of Ian Smith here is so important about thinking about how the dye on the stage is actually so powerful in seeing grace. And this is Ian Smith's terminology, is when you race making is also part of seeing it happening, and the stage gives this center stage, so to speak.
Yeah, the mediation of the audience is one of those factors, and we don't have as much evidence as we might like about how people were responding to these plays. We don't have lots and lots of reviews or anything like that. But I do find, it must have come into play in the sense that on the contemporary stage, where you have multiracial casting and cross-racial casting, sometimes done consciously and for effect, sometimes done as a kind of race-blind or race-neutral practice, audiences, however much you might, want to be just saying, well, this is a character, this is an Amelia who happens to be Black, what audiences do immediately is race both the actor and the character. And anytime you're performing for a contemporary audience, you have to be mindful of the fact that their ability to read bodies will exceed any of your intention.
Yeah, absolutely. And here, the work of Ayanna Thompson on color conscious casting has given me very much this vocabulary to be able to see the fault lines in colorblind casting, for example. And if theater makers are not aware of these racial dynamics, it can go very, very wrong. And this is why also our work on race and racing is also very helpful to theater practitioners because they can also get a sense of how whiteness is created in the text. I work on foreign queens, but also as I work on foreign queens, I think I also see how whiteness is produced, how some queens are considered white, their virtue. For example, currently I'm working on Thomas of Woodstock, Anne of Bohemia, even though she's non-English, but when in a play like Thomas of Woodstock, she gets she all traces of her otherness are muted, and you can see the process of whitening her because and transforming her into a proto-Protestant figure. In the imagination.
That's so interesting. That makes me think about Arthur Little's work about white hands. And actually I was quite struck by it because again, I was just teaching Hester Poulter's The Unfortunate Florinda. And one of the things I noticed there was that instead of white hands, it was white shoulders. And so there's this foreign queen Zabra who gets lost at on a sort of sea storm with her ladies, who rolls up into Spain and ends up marrying the king. She does it rather than get raped, essentially, you know, and it even says, like, rather than, you know, wait for him to force her, she decides to marry him and convert. But she is quite explicitly described as having white shoulders. And one of my students, you know, I pointed this out, one of my students suggested that you might see what's registering there is some change in fashion. And of course, if you look at 17th century aristocratic women's dresses, they do have a lot of off-the-shoulder dresses,
yes,
much more so than the days of the, you know, the full ruffs.
Yes.
So you could see that racing of the female body, particularly of the upper class female body, sort of shifting, you know, based upon what was important at the time. And Zabra was interesting because, you know, we find out really early that she's super white looking. But there's another character, Fidelia, who isn't, we don't know that she's Black until later in the romance. We are just told that she's beautiful, and it's not until now I'm like worried I'm mixing up my characters because there's a bunch of F's. I think it's Fidelia who you finally do find out that she has Black skin because her beloved mentions that his picture of her he claims it's a Madonna, but it's a Black Madonna. And so he gets asked about it and he's like, we just have a Black Madonna. So we just find out in this really weird roundabout way. And it's such an interesting mechanism because, you know, there's been so much work to make sure that we see Zabra as white, that when we get to that, you suddenly have to come to terms with the fact that you were racing a character and had defaulted to whatever that was. And I think for most readers, because of the heavy emphasis on Zabra's whiteness and Florinda's whiteness, that you sort of automatically race the character and it disappears until that moment where all of a sudden it sort of gives you this back formation to realize what you were doing all along. It's not that you weren't, and it's not that the text wasn't, it's that you could, like, you know, erase that for a while and not be conscious of it. And then all of a sudden it's this moment where it forces you to consciousness.
Oh, fascinating. It's fascinating because it's like, it's really an example of how we're conditioned to see whiteness as neutral until Blackness enters the chat. And this is when, you know, we notice race. As you said, kind of not commenting on the how whiteness is being produced. Otherwise, you know, the shoulders is so in line with how Catherine of Braganza was presented, because when she arrived, Pepys tells us that she's wearing this very, like, this shabby Spanish habit, and her hair looks like the Iberian hairstyle was the frop that he thinks is very, very ugly. And you see her being graced as she enters London in her first procession. You see her, they're commenting on her olivaster skin. And then this image sticks to her. But the images of her, the ones that she commissions from the Italian painter, because her the mistress of Charles II was French, so that was her way of self-presentation, is very, very much the white ideal figure of purity that we see in Renaissance art. So it's very fascinating, and also, of course, you know, the shoulders, her white shoulders show.
That's so, yeah, it was one of those things that I I have a sense of the aesthetics of 17th century painting, but until I was thinking about it in those terms, it suddenly, the other thing that I've been thinking about too, this relates up to some of the work that like Fark and Cooper has done on makeup,
Yes,
and race, and the way that that comes into play. Also Andrea Stevens. But I was thinking as well about just what it means to paint white versus black skin and the mechanics that people must have understood about how you produce certain kinds of tones of skin. I was able to find a little bit about it, but I'm not an art historian. So one of the things I would love is to know more about the mechanics and the theorizing of how you produce certain tints of skin. There's been a lot of really great work done on the sort of presentational aspects of, the idea that you might sort of insert a black servant as a way of setting off the whiteness of the aristocratic person in there. But I do wonder, how do you produce that luminescent white skin as opposed to some of the darker skins? And there's a whole technical aspect to that I think, in terms of, I know in a lot of Renaissance art has sort of thought about things like how material is important to it, like the lapis lazuli that becomes important for the blue of the Virgin Mary's dress. And I'm curious about the extent to which in the visual medium that any of those kind of visual representations, that there had to have been a technique of producing skin color at the time. I'd love to know more about it. I looked around. If anyone watching this has sources beyond what I've been able to find, I'd love to know, because I would really be fascinated to know, what is it that you're thinking as a painter? How do you go about producing it? And obviously we don't know as much as we'd like about the stage. And the British were not on the sort of leading edge of portraiture. They imported their portraitists for the most part, but they must have been bringing over some of that knowledge. And so that's one of the things that I'm hoping to discover more about.
Yeah, this is a question for art historians, and also I'm thinking of Miles Greer's work on ink face. He focuses more on the stage, but he's very much thinking about hue and the production of hue. So Miles, if you have an answer. Dial the number on the screen. This is really so wonderful, and you gave me so much to think about and keep on exploring. This is I'm very grateful for this conversation.
And thank you for entertaining my big questions, the ones that I can't answer for my students.
I'm very happy you asked them, and you gave me a chance to I think vocalize this world that I've been inhabiting for years, and it's very useful to actually have conversations. And I think, with COVID, what we lost is the ability to have conversations around conferences and before and after to keep these queries ongoing. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just lovely to see people. I know that one of the things that a lot of people have been using in the absence of human contact has been these various different forums, like the kind that the Folger Shakespeare Library and the Arizona State Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies. Those have been hugely important for people to help keep us grounded and know that we're not just sort of writing into a void.
Yes. So thank you very much for this this lifeline, the Folger and Newberry and ACMRS And also, we're hoping that that this accessibility also remains after the pandemic. And I want to say yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking me on.
The closing question that is a Bitlit's closing question is, what does literature mean to you? And if you have thoughts on what that is, Jen.
I mean, the turnabout's fair fray. I asked you the big questions. You know, I think when it comes down to it, that I think what literature is to me is a space for communication. And it's a way of having a creative experience that's shared. And what I mean by that is that we can all sit by ourselves and read a book or an article or watch a play. And where the text becomes literary for me is where you become part of a reading or watching community, so that you can learn to explain to other people what it is that you see when you read that book or you attend a performance of a play. It's what enables us to go from the solitary experience of the aesthetic and the representational to the communal.
Oh, that's so beautiful that you thought about this the network that literature enables. I like it so much. For me, it's the sharing of stories, this desire to connect as well through storytelling. It's what humanizes us, what makes us recognizable, other than just one of many. So I want to thank you very, very much for this chance to have a conversation with you, Jen.
It's been lovely. It's so nice to have a chance to talk to you.
Me too. Me too.
And I'm delighted that you have your new position that you will be starting in the fall. But it's a loss for us. And I do congratulate you on it, though. And I think that I hope that we'll be able to go back to conferences so that I'll have a chance to do more of this with you.
Yes, I would love that very much.